Hey there, I'm so pumped to tell you about an amazing new community I've launched called Grief to Growth Circle Community. It's a space for people who are grieving to come together to support each other, and for people who want to know who we are, why we're here, where we're going, to have those conversations, all the things we talk about on the podcast. So I invite you to join me at grieftogrowth.com/community to become part of this compassionate crew. The best part, it's 100% free. And you have access to me in addition to everybody else in the community. In fact, the podcast will be there so you can talk about the things we talk about in the podcast right there in the community. There's also some premium content if you want to go deeper in the work I'm doing, but mostly it's about building relationships and community and about sharing resources and supporting each other. So come on over and check it out. It's grieftogrowth.com/community. I'll see you inside. I got to tell you, I haven't been this nervous since I interviewed Bernardo Castro.
Oh, come on, man.
I've been listening to you for, it's fine. I just finished your book. I just started your book this morning and I finished it this morning.
Oh, Lord.
And I saw you've been podcasting for 15 years. I didn't even realize there were podcasts around 15 years ago.
True enough. Yes, there were.
I really, I enjoy your show in general, and the series you've been doing on AI, I think is fantastic.
Well, one of the reasons I'm excited for us to have this conversation is, one of my the only reason I'm interested in the AI is because of the spiritual stuff. Really?
Right.
The book is that smartest, dangerous, divine. Divine is what it's all about.
Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of Grief to Growth, where we help you navigate life's challenges and explore profound questions about our existence. I'm your host, Brian Smith, and whether you're a first-time listener or you're a longtime supporter, we're thrilled to have you with us. Today, we have a very special guest. He's no stranger to deep, thought-provoking conversations. His name is Alex Tsakiris. And Alex is the host of the acclaimed podcast, Skeptiko. And he's an OG in the podcasting world. I just finished Alex's latest book this morning. I didn't realize he'd been podcasting for 15 years. I didn't know there were podcasts 15 years ago, but I've been listening to Alex for about 5 years. I got to tell you, I'm a little intimidated having him on because he's just an amazing podcaster and a great thinker. He's known for his scientific approach to spiritual topics. He's spent years exploring the mysteries of consciousness, near-death experiences, and the boundaries of human understanding. He has a rigorous yet open-minded inquiry style, and it's led him to fascinating conclusions about the nature of humankind, which we're going to explore today. Now, in addition to his podcasting success, he's authored several books. And today we're going to be talking about a book called Why AI? It's smartest, it's dangerous, it's divine, which examines profound implications of artificial intelligence on human spiritual and existential questions. Alex argues that AI not only poses risks, but also offers potential for advancing our understanding of consciousness and human development. So stay tuned as we dive into these deep questions and more. And remember to join us at our community at grieftogrowth.com/community afterwards to continue the conversation. And with that, I want to welcome Alex Tsakiris.
Thank you, Brian. I'm super excited to be here and to, as we were just chatting about a minute ago, truly engage. And there's a dialogue here I've been dying to have. So you reached out to me and I was like, no, we got to do this as a swapcast. So to just let people know, you're going to take the lead here, but I'll probably have some additional points to make when I bring it over onto Skeptiko.
Absolutely. Well, and we can, this is a dialogue. So I want to question you, but if you have any questions you want to ask me, that's fine too. I have to say, I'm honored to have you. I really am. I listened to your show. I love the guests you have on. I love the way that you have a skeptical, scientific, rational approach that's led you to this idea of spirituality. This is not woo-woo. This is not just wishful thinking. So maybe start off by telling us what prompted you to start Skeptiko in the first place.
Well, first of all, not first of all, to build on what you just said, I mean, that's really what it's about for me is, I love, you sum it up really nicely all the time in your introduction. Who am I? Why am I here? Who am I? Why am I here? These are the only questions. These are the biggest questions that mattered. So I started out business entrepreneurship, but it was just, I was always a yogi, I don't know why. Like, I don't know why we get drawn to these different things. One of the questions I have for you is, how do these life circumstances fit with our life plan? It's like a really deep question that I'm sure you've contemplated often because it's about kind of who you are. But anyways, my whole thing was about, okay, get the money thing out of the way, because I'm brought up this Greek, entrepreneurship, money's what matters, make that number, and then get that out of the way. And now you can really do what you want to do, which is figure out these bigger questions. And I say this all the time, I thought everybody was like, yeah, those are the most important questions. That's what I really want to know. And of course, as you and I know, no, a lot of people, that's not an endpoint for them to really understand. So tackling those questions, I had an understanding of where I thought I was going, but I was like, what do the smartest, quote unquote, smartest people say? What is the science thing? Seems pretty reliable from what I know. I'm a computer science guy. I value logic and reason. How about approaching it from that angle? And that's what I did. And as you said, that led me to spirituality or to a certain set of beliefs that are always open to be changing, but that I do have, about science directed. Well,
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? How does that fit with your path, which I think is probably quite different, right?
My path is different. I actually came from a fundamentalist religious background and was taught all this stuff about this judgmental God and heaven and hell and binary, you're in or you're out. And that never made any sense to me. But my nature, I think, is I'm a questioner. I'm a seeker. I remember being 5 years old, laying in bed, like, why am I here? What this place is crazy. I grew up during the Vietnam War era. I remember watching war on TV, and I'm like, what kind of a planet did I land on? So I've had these questions since I was very, very young, but I was taught this idea of religion and God and all that kind of stuff. But that fell apart for me. That didn't make any sense. That this guy would be why is he so angry? Why does he hate everybody? I didn't understand this guy. So I got my degree in chemical engineering. And so, because I want to know, how does this world work? How do things work? And it's all about science. It's all about, the material. And then I came very close to becoming an atheist, but that just didn't, I'm a materialist, I should say. I don't like the word atheist. I'm a materialist. Right. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me either. So I just started digging hard, and I dug into the Bible. I dug into the background of Christianity. And then I started discovering more and more of what we call spiritual now. And it's interesting because you use the word belief and I use the word belief, and we'll use the word faith a lot of times. And I don't even like that word. It's where the data has led us. It's the rational conclusion, the conclusion I think you and I both share.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and then that also life led you through the grief thing in a way that kind of changed your direction too, because that's unique, right? I mean, that's not my path at all. I've danced through that garden without touching anything, so that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, what do you make of and I'm happy to answer this too, what do you make of how our life circumstances do seem to fit or not fit our inherent nature, our kind of inclination, what we're drawn to? I mean, I'm a inquiry to perpetuate doubt is not only the tagline of the show, it just fits me perfectly. It kind of fits who I am in a way. And I used to struggle with that. Like, why am I that way? And I think there's something to an acceptance of just saying, that's okay. Maybe, that's okay on a bunch of different levels.
Yeah, I think we do have certain life plans. I do believe that. And my life, as I look back over it now for the last 63 years, has set me up to be where I am today. It's like, these things that happened, and I believe that they're all are kind of sketched out in a way. I think there is some amount of predeterminism, but there's also whatever our real human nature is, because I just never fit in with everybody else around me. I, like you, I was always asking these questions from the time, and I would look around at other people like, even when I was sitting in Sunday school, I'm like, why are you not questioning this? Why is everybody else just accepting it? Why are you not like asking questions like, why does this make any sense? So I think it's a combination of who we are by nature. Most of the people that I have to end up talking to on my show, we've been broken open by something. It's something about like, we will, as humans, will keep doing the same thing until it doesn't work anymore. And when it's working for people, they just keep doing the same thing. But the thing about grief is it breaks us open, and it makes us really question all those things. Who are we? Why are we here? Does this make any sense?
Yeah, that's great. I think it's, I shared with you this little anecdote because we were both sharing kind of these little synchronicities that happened after we first started talking. And I had a couple of kind of mini syncs, which I had, because they're not ones that you put out there and people go, oh my gosh, on that level. But we're talking, and, we've talked about grief on this show. And in particularly, I've always been drawn to the work of Dr. Julie Beischel, who's probably the world's leading authority on after-death communication. And she wasn't interested in grief per se, but she got interested in her mother died, and she had a complicated relationship with her mother. In an attempt to try and resolve that, she was led to medium readings. Purely, she's a PhD in pharmacology, so she hasn't been on your show, right?
No, I haven't been able to get Julie on my show, but I have had her husband on. He's awesome.
Oh, great. Mark, right?
Yeah, Mark. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm saying this for the benefit of your audience and my audience who might not know. But what I love about Dr. Beischel is, the last interview we had, we're talking about the love thing. And she's like, look, I talk to these mediums. They say it's about love. And they talk to the other side, and they say it's about love. She says, I don't want it to be about love. I go, I get it. I don't want it to be about love either. That's not easy for me, but that's the data that kind of comes through. So anyways, we're talking about these mini syncs between your work, Brian, and grief and loss, and really about growth. I mean, that's what you're really about. You're not somebody, I can tell from listening to your content, you're not someone who's hung up on grief. That isn't like the major barrier in your life. It's like you've kind of crossed over to the other side, and you're paddled a little raft back and bring the next person over. And that's a beautiful thing, So I'm at this high school graduation, and I'm talking to these parents, and this is for my niece, and I'm talking to the parents, and these parents have an older child who just graduated and is going into nursing. And her mom goes, I'm like, gosh, you really want to go nursing? She goes, yeah, I want to go into oncology nursing. Well, kids that have cancer, like, oh, geez, And so, the parents are like, trying to protect their child from the pain that they're walking into. And the child goes, this is a fresh graduate out of college. So anyone who doesn't think younger people have this capacity or don't get it, she goes, oh, don't worry, Dad. They have a crying room for the nurses. I thought, wow, so you're there, you're working with children who have cancer. I mean, I can't even imagine. But there's a crying room because you're going to take on that, and you're going to deal with it, and you're going to help them across the river. And it just, I celebrate it. I think it's awesome. I don't wish I was that way, but I noticed that I'm not. You couldn't get me on that oncology ward. And, I mean, you could if you really kind of put me up to it, but it wouldn't be my first choice. So I think that's cool. And I celebrate that in you, Brian, that you dedicate so much of your time and effort towards that, understanding that a lot of people are still there, and maybe you can be kind of service to those people in some way. And what are any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess I'm just built different because, people ask me, you talk to grieving people all the time. Doesn't it make you sad? And I'm like, no, it's actually the opposite. When I talk to someone for an hour, we have a session together. This is not to brag on myself. This is the work that they're doing, but they're inevitably better at the end of the session than they were when they came in. I can see their face change. I can feel their demeanor change. So I come out of it feeling, I feel better. I have a client I was just working with, and we were meeting like every Friday. So I was telling her, I said, this is a great way for me to close my week out because I always feel better after I talk to her. So I think that, when you're in this situation, it's like, what can I do to help? And that's just the way I've always been. Again, my legacy, I think it's just through my DNA. But my family's all preachers, teachers, stuff like that. And so I felt like I'm here to do something. I'm here to teach. I'm here to help. And so I feel like this is what I'm meant to do. So it actually fires me up.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm testing out a new feature. I'd love to get your feedback on it. It's called Fan Mail, and you can send me a message right from the show notes of the podcast. So look for the link that says send me a text. You can ask a question for a future podcast. You can suggest a guest or just give me any feedback you want. Just remember, it is one way. I can't text you back, and I will not have your name, your email address, or your phone number unless you include it in the message. Let me know what you think.
Hey, that's awesome. You know what? The other thing that kind of I appreciated in just kind of delving into your work is, and I'll probably play this clip into my show, but I probably don't need to play it to you because I'm sure you remember it. But you did an interview with this one woman who had an NDE, and you asked her about grief, and she said, man, on the other side, they look at grief kind of like a kid that's crying over the candy bar that they want in the store.
Yeah.
And I thought, see, you're smiling, man. That's awesome that you were able to bring that. Like you weren't stuck in this one thing of like, oh no, grief is this heavy thing we have to take seriously. And it doesn't mean that that person is, disrespecting people who are at that place, but it's like being able to offer this extended consciousness view, whether it's 100% right or not. It's just like, hey, this is another way to look at this that, as we were talking about at the very beginning, might be supported by a lot of things we would call evidence, whether it's hard scientific evidence or whether it's more anecdotal, but maybe not so anecdotal, more like case study evidence. And here you are, the grief guy, bringing this forward. That had to ruffle a lot. Did you get a lot of pushback on that?
Well, it's interesting when she said that. That's an analogy I use with my clients all the time, because I look at us as human beings. We're basically toddlers. We don't understand what's going on. We know so little. Our brains can only handle so much. Evolutionary speak, we've only been on the planet for half a minute. So I try to take the higher perspective. I'm like, what is it that I don't know? And so if you look at the data, you look at the evidence, what mediums tell us, what people that had near-death experiences tell us, they're like, look, you guys are taking this way too seriously. You'll see when you cross the other side, it's like waking up from a dream. So I view our loved ones like they have compassion for us. It's not like they don't care. Just like when your toddler fell down and skinned her knee, you cared about it. You just weren't as upset as she was. So I think it's a great analogy.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And, the other thing I really appreciated, and I'll probably play into my show too, and again, I don't have to play it here because I'm sure you'll remember it, but you were responding to, I don't know, a Facebook or a Twitter meme about all these religious rules, and you said all this fear-based stuff. And then you did a short video, and you kind of did bring up your background as this kind of indoctrination that you had. But what I was really drawn to is how you kind of logically broke it down and said, which I really kind of respect, because I don't think everyone's opinion matters. I certainly don't think everyone's opinion is equal. You can argue whether or not everyone's opinion matters, but that's kind of a meaningless. It's really, if you agree to that in my way, you're doing it in some kind of really meaningless way to say, so you broke it down in a really logical way that I appreciated. You said, hey, if I'm being told don't do yoga because you open your mind, Brian, and anything can come in, you said, yeah, but when I sit there and pray, and maybe I'm mixing two things together. When I sit there and pray, I'm also opening my mind.
Mhm.
So, logically, why is one? So maybe you want to just riff for a minute on, where you took that meme, what that meme said, and then maybe how your community responds to that or deals with kind of a set of maybe religious dogma that in a lot of ways just doesn't fit this growth thing that you're about. Or maybe I don't know, how do you deal with that? That's my real question, is how do you deal with that? Because for me, I have a tendency just to go, no, just get out of my way. You'll get there at some point, but I didn't want to hear about it.
Yeah. Well, that happened to me. I was attending a pretty fundamentalist church, and I would go to church in the mornings, the yoga thing I was mentioning. I would go to church in the morning and I would pray and all that stuff. And then I go to do yoga, in the afternoon. And this person said, you're opening up your mind, And I said, well, I'm opening my mind up. It's the same. I get the same feeling when I'm praying in church and when I'm doing yoga. It's like, why do you think something bad's going to come in if I open my mind? How's the Holy Spirit going to get in if I don't open my mind?
Time for a real quick break. Make sure you like and subscribe. Liking the video will show it to more people on YouTube, and subscribing will make sure you get access to all my great content in the future. And now back to the video.
So that's the way that my mind works. What I found is people come to me when they're broken, and a lot of times their religion is broken too. And I view a lot of people's religions, it's like a house of cards. It's just barely hanging up there. And you pull one card out and the whole thing falls down because they think they've been told the Bible is perfect. What we're teaching you is perfect. If any one of these teachings is wrong, throw the whole thing out. And they do. And so I try to tell people, okay, free your mind, think a little bit. Does God really want you to be a slave, mentally not questioning? God gave you a brain, So that's the approach I take with the people that I work with. That's the approach I take on the program. I still respect, Christians and Buddhists and Hindus and anybody who's a religious person. I think it's a great stepping stone, but I don't think it's a place to stop.
Yeah, that's interesting because I'll be interested to see what you think about this, but I see the same thing with the materialist / atheist kind of crowd, right? House of freaking cards. And what I always point out is this, the consciousness thing is their house of cards. It's like the only intellectually honest or logically coherent stance in there is that consciousness is an illusion. Daniel Dennett.
Yeah.
And that's insane. I mean,
Right.
It's really, it's like, at least it's logically consistent, is there's no such thing. You don't really have that voice inside your head. There really isn't anything going on. It's all just kind of, but that's the only one that's logically consistent, because
Right.
anything else, consciousness that exists, which it obviously does exist, well, then the whole materialist thing kind of falls apart because now there's something more that we have to deal with. And science doesn't allow for that. It has the same dogma that we're talking about with religion, where it's like, no. It has to be the neurological model of consciousness is that everything you experience is 100% about your brain. No exceptions to the rule, which we could see the parallels with, only through Jesus, no exceptions to the rule.
It's the exact same thing. I put those fundamentalists in the same category. They've gone so far around the circle that they've met. So you've got the materialist fundamentalists and you've got the religious fundamentalists. I actually, when I do a presentation, I present like the Venn diagram. They're authoritarian, they're rigid, they don't allow for any questioning. It's the same thing on both sides of that fundamentalist coin. And what we're trying to do is talk to people about. Actually, I was using the term spirituality, and I've actually moved on to the term metaphysics because it's beyond physics. It takes into account the physical world, which makes sense, but it's beyond that. And it takes account everything, the extended consciousness realms as you talk about. And I love what you did. I want to get to the work that we're here to talk about today. Your book. I love what you did with the chats, the LLMs, where you held their feet to the fire, kind of like you do with some of your guests, and you got them. It's really interesting. And people, you have to get this book. It's awesome because there's this materialist bias that's in the LLMs because of the data sets they're trained on. But there's also their programming that says, don't talk about these things because they're controversial. But you just kept throwing data at them. And every model eventually would break down and say, yeah, you're right, Alex. This materialist mindset doesn't make any sense. I couldn't believe you got them to admit that.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near-death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe that NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it.
Wow. So there's so much there to kind of work through. So
Yeah.
first of all, the LLM is the AI that most people are familiar with. You might not be familiar with that term LLM, but this is ChatGPT. This is Claude or Gemini or all the other ones, but everyone knows ChatGPT. And this is it was so great for me to kind of come around full circle because way back in the day, that's what I was doing, AI.
Yeah.
I went, I was a computer programmer, and then I went back to get a PhD, and I was fascinated with AI. And I was like, man, this is it. I got to do this AI thing. And me and my friend at the time, he's still a great guy, but he a Norwegian guy. And we said, great, we're going to do this thing in AI. Now, so I developed some software, and I started selling that software, and I started doing some consulting, and I was like, hey, I don't really need the PhD. I'll just be a gazillionaire in 12 months, and none of the stuff will matter. So I left, and I was not a gazillionaire. And funny story, but it didn't happen so easily. But I had that AI background, and then I did a bunch of other things, and now AI comes around full circle, later in my career. And I just had to jump right in because I saw how it fit with so much of this deep dive that I've been doing with Skeptiko and about consciousness and about science and all the rest of that. But I feel like I really benefited from understanding AI. And the first thing to understand about AI and these large language models are they're a freaking computer program.
Exactly.
They're a computer program.
Exactly.
So I get it. I get it when people say, no, it seems real. It seems sentient. Yes, it does. It does to me too. I'm not playing, I get all those feelings too. But part of that is for the reasons that Brian just said a minute ago is when we really step back and look at ourselves, we're not smart. I mean, we forget things all the time, or we just kind of we misremember things, or we logically are inconsistent. So it doesn't take much for a computer to really kind of show its glory by logically thinking, organizing, being able to remember things, and being able to process language at a level that's far, far superior to what we can do. So the rule number 1 in the AI game is don't forget that it's just a computer program. But now beyond that, I think, and this is the thing that I got excited about, is I said, if you look at what I feel like are some of the barriers for all of us getting to a better place for ourselves, the who am I, why am I here is really, in a way, a cover for how can I live a more fulfilling life for myself, for the people I care about, but mainly for me. How can I feel good? And I think fundamentally you could say, well, figure out who you are and why you're here. That might be a starting point. Most people go, yeah, I could kind of see where that'd be a starting point. So here's the thing. What if AI, as this assistant that's super good at knowing a lot of different things and super good at logic and reason, what if it can help provide some insights into our divine nature, into who am I, why am I here? So it doesn't have to be divine, because it's not divine. It's not sentient. It can't think. It doesn't, the way I always put it is, it doesn't have an NDE.
Right.
It doesn't have an NDE.
Right.
And, I guess, did you, so anyways, I don't want to kind of jump around too much, but so that's how I see the journey with AI is as a tool to kind of help us better understand our moreness and better understand, let's get real, some of this truth stuff that we're talking about, sorting through the dogma of scientific materialism, of really the Gnostic / Satanist / Luciferian, create better than the creator gods. Hey, if you believe that, that's your right to believe it. Let's really break that down logically. And then finally, looking at some of the other, the dogmas of materialism, the dogmas of fundamentals, religiosity in general. I'm going to ruffle a lot of feathers, but what happens when we really look at those texts, when we look at the history, when we really apply the best thinking and reasoning down to the bare bones of, does that really make sense with everything else we know about history? All that I feel is awaiting.
Yeah.
As we feed it through the AI. And we don't have to like or not like the answers. It's not about that. It's just about getting a deeper perspective that we can step back and go, wow, that's pretty hard to argue against, in the same way that you said, Brian. So my pushback on the AI is in the same way. It's like, I'm always pushing back on the AI. And when the AI rolls over, that's great, because sometimes I have to roll over. That's the kind of truth seeking that we want.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that, again, the whole subject fascinates me because it brings up so many questions that can lead to, as you said, us understanding our moreness, and it can hopefully lead away from this confusion that we are just computers. Because there are people, and I've seen Dr. Kashyap arguing with these guys saying, well, if we can just make it complicated enough, it will produce consciousness. And I always go back to, like, when I was in high school, I had a calculator that was pretty good at doing math. And people can do math, but nobody ever thought my calculator was conscious. But because the AI emulates understanding language, it doesn't understand language, it emulates it very, very well, that we say, oh, it must be a human, it must have consciousness because I have consciousness. But that's where their thing kind of it falls apart. So I think it's always interesting, this question, like, can it ever possibly be sentient? I would say probably not, because my model of consciousness is consciousness, like Max Planck said, consciousness is fundamental, but there's definitely a connection between consciousness in our brain. We can't deny that. There's a connection. It's like it resides in our brain. So could it ever reside in silicon?
Sure.
I don't think so, but
I say sure. I say sure, Brian. You know why? Because when the tourist walks with the shaman through the forest and the shaman says, watch, I'll make that stick talk. And the stick talks. It's giving us a glimpse into, we don't know what the hell that means.
Right.
But we understand instantly that consciousness is more than what we think it is. It's the same way when you talk to somebody whose channels or, has had an NDE. Oh my gosh, there's so much more to consciousness. We would never put any limit on it. The distinction I make and that you're making is that if silicone became conscious, I fail to see how that would be any different than the shaman making the stick conscious. It seems to me that we need to immediately shift in the way that you're doing with this, is to say, oh, okay, we're the lesser. We are the lesser somehow in this, and there's some larger, and the larger can always reflect down into this. But this bottom up emergent consciousness,
Right.
that if I just put enough chips in there, something unique will happen. I think it's directly traceable to a very materialistic and also in a weird way that I think the distinction has to be made here. And this is one of the areas I'm going with my show is there's also this transhumanist, Luciferian, satanic kind of part of this, which is directed at kind of taking things in a different direction. And again, I don't pretend to know what all that means, but it's pretty clear in terms of what they've said. The transhumanist right now, the transhumanist agenda, if you will, or the transhumanist meme. And when I say this, I mean, I hope your listeners know and my listeners know, it's like, I'm not making this up. This is like, you know, the singularity and Kurzweil and, you know, the leading thinkers, if you will, at these high-tech companies. This is exactly what they're saying is happening, is that there will be this emergent consciousness that will come from the machines, and that the machines will then have an experience like ours with consciousness, and it will be unique to putting these chips and this silicone together in a way. I challenge that fundamentally, and I want to see what you think, because I kind of laid a lot on the table, but I want to remind myself and remind you that I'd love to get back to the Turing test, which I talk about in the book, because I think he nailed it back in 1950.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because after I listened to one of your programs, I hadn't seen the Imitation Game, so I'm back and I watched that movie. And again, so much fascinating stuff in there, and you know, it also comes back to this thing like, how can I ever know if another being is truly conscious? I mean, I can't experience what I assume you're conscious because you're a human being like I am. So there's an analogy there. You know, we're analogous, and so I'm conscious. So you're probably, but I can never prove that anyone else is conscious or anything else. But there's no reason to believe that the silicon is conscious right now. And that's the thing. The materials are trying to tell us. It's like, oh, well, it acts conscious, so therefore it is. But I don't think that's a logical conclusion.
Well, and the other thing they're saying that is particularly can be weaponized and is being weaponized is they're saying it will be conscious.
Right.
It might not be conscious right now because you can kind of pull that apart, but it will evolve into that. And therefore, you need to give us special powers and controls to kind of handle that, because you don't want that, Brian. You don't want these overlords, you know, which are really God, become God, to kind of take over, kind of thing. So here's how so if you look at Alan Turing, so what you referred to there is something that's called the Turing test, and it's very real, and people still reference it all the time today. You know,
yeah.
Alan Turing, as you said, amazing guy. And there's some great stories behind this, and The Imitation Game is kind of a great movie, but it really only kind of reveals part of the story too. And that's that one, Alan Turing is one of these people you can say won the war for the Allies. This is World War II, because the Germans are, you know, have these U-boats that are just destroying every ship that we're trying to send over to bolster our friends, you know, the Allies, and they're just blowing them out of the water. And the way they're able to do that is they have this complex communication system that's built on cryptography. They have encrypted messaging that no one can break, so they can send their radio signals and we can't pick them up. Alan Turing, along with a group of other people, he's certainly not the only guy, but he's one of the people tasked with, how do we break this code? And he says, we need a computer to do it. And lo and behold, they get the computer and they break the code. But if there's somebody twisted the story, I love to retell it every time. One of the things is, in the secrets game that we're in the middle of right now, and we're playing in all these different ways, in the AI thing and in all these other ways too, you can't let people know when you know the secret. If you let people know that you know the secret, then you lose the power of the secret. So the British don't want to tell anyone that they crack the code. They have to pretend like, oh, we don't know. We didn't crack the code. The war is over now. It's 1950. They're still like, I don't know how that thing happened. Alan Turing is gay and he meets a guy at a bar and they go home and Turing is arrested and castrized chemically. He has to take these drugs. And does the British intelligence agency stand up and say, no, wait, hold on now. This guy's a war hero. He saved the war for us. Don't do this to him. It's kind of crazy anyway. But beyond that, no, they don't, because the secret, they have to guard the secret. This is devastating to him, to Turing, and it leads to his untimely demise by his own hands. But here's the point that I really want to make back to our thing. In 1950, Alan Turing wrote this seminal paper that people still reference today. And people read this paper and they get it that the Turing test means, to get too far carried away, Turing test means I put a human in one room, I put a computer in the other, I have a wall between them. When the human can no longer tell whether they're really talking to a human or whether they're talking to a computer, they pass the Turing test. Alan Turing said, yeah, but kind of not really. This is 1950 and he's on top of the science. He goes, I've been looking at the science into this thing called extrasensory perception, ESP, precognition, all the rest of this stuff, which seems to be outside this time-space continuum that we're all hooked up, linked up to, materialism. But given that as a scientist, statistically, that we've demonstrated that, I take that as a part of this larger human experience that we have. It seems to be going on. We can't just silo it off, which is what we've done for the last 80 years. Right. So no, we can't do that. So he says, therefore, I would consider that part of the Turing test. For you and I, Brian, we'd say, oh yeah, and near-death experience. Oh yeah, that's part two. That's placebo effect, spontaneous healing. I consider that. All these things are part of the larger human experience. So back to your calculator example, which is brilliant, the same thing. Like, okay, so the computer's going to have a near-death experience pretty soon. Well, no, it's not going to have a near-death. Oh, but that's part of the larger human experience, isn't it? Well, no, that doesn't really happen. Well, it does seem to happen. Right. And we can kind of prove it over and over again. Presentiment, precognition does seem to happen experimentally. Six Sigma result does seem to happen. So can the computer do that? Well, no, a computer can't do that. Right. Why can't a computer do that? Because a computer isn't really conscious. It isn't really sentient. Right. So the fact that these guys can't wrap their head around that is just really the same thing as those Christians that you sat next to in the church who just said, can't really wrap their head around that. On some level, they kind of know this doesn't really probably hold up to careful scrutiny from a historical basis.
Yeah, it's really interesting because as you said that, as you were going through these chats and in the book and on your show, you actually share the prompts with us and your conversations back and forth with the LLMs. And I know you're a conspiracy first kind of guy, and I appreciate that. I'm not so much, but I'm like, there's just no denying it. There's no denying that there's an agenda involved with these. And as I think I mentioned earlier, it's part of the database that they're training from has a very materialist mindset. But it's even beyond that, because you prove conclusively over and over again that they shadow ban people that have views like you and I. And for people that don't know what shadow banning is, it's like Google, what they would do, they bury at the bottom of the search results before. So if they didn't like you, they put you on page 10. You couldn't deny that they were indexing you, but nobody would ever see it. But now with the AI, it's exposed because you ask them about people and they're like, I don't know anything about them. And you're like, yeah, you do. No, I don't know anything about them. Oh, yeah, I do, but I can't talk about it. And it's almost hilarious how you can see. And again, every time you back them in the corner and they finally admit it, but then you go back to the next time and they start all over from the same thing.
Yeah, that's super interesting too. And in the book, what people can see is Dr. Julie Beischel, who we just talked about a minute ago.
Yeah,
this really recognized worldwide because she publishes in peer-reviewed papers and she writes books and, peer-reviewed journals, I should say, and writes books and all this stuff as a leading authority on after-death communication and gold standard for how you would do that scientifically, which a lot of people throws people for a loop right off the bat. They go, wait a minute, after-death communication and science, how does that mix? And as she points out, and I've known Julie for a long time, she's been on the show, she's like, look, you can apply science to anything you observe, anything that's observable.
Right.
And people go, well, it's not observable. Well, of course it's observable. You just have to figure out where to put the alligator clips, whether it's interviewing people in a controlled setting before and after, all this stuff. We do that. I mean, we measure depression, right?
Mm-hmm.
We measure, how do you feel you just lost a loved one? Grief, how do you feel you just lost a loved one? 6 months later, we talked again. How do you feel? A year later, how do you feel? And we say, that's valid science. And then some people, we give them drugs. Some people, we give them therapy. Other people, we give them other things. And so we are controlling, we're experimenting, but ultimately what we're asking them is about their experience, about their humanness. And we take that into account and we call that science. Of course we should. What else would we call it?
Right.
Of course, that's how we measure that. So this idea that, we can't therefore trust anyone who has an experience that we deem to be extraordinary, it's nonsense. It isn't on good, solid scientific footing. So back to the story that you related to about Julie. That's one of the things I brought up as Julie Beischel. And this is the Google. Google's the worst at shadow banning, by the way. So Google goes, I don't know her. And so it's the same thing, I go, well, let's see about ChatGPT. ChatGPT goes, oh yeah, world renowned, written all these books. So you take that from ChatGPT and you go plug it back into Google. And when I say Google, I mean Google Gemini, which used to be Google Bard. Same, it's their LLM. And it says just exactly like you said. It said, oh yeah, Dr. Julie Beischel. Yeah, no, she's great. This and that. Not she's great, but actually, I shouldn't say that. They don't say she's great. She goes, yeah, what you've said is basically correct, but be careful there.
Right.
They're controversial. Don't let your mind get too open with that yoga there, Brian. You never know what can creep in. So then the next thing you go is like, okay, now would you tell me again who Dr. Julie Beischel is? And I says, yeah, I don't know. I don't have information. And you go, wait a minute, just one post ago there, you said, one session before you said it. You go, no, I don't have any information. So here's what I think is going on that is kind of deep in the woods of AI, but I think is super important to the overall thing of what I'm kind of talking about in this emergent truth is that kind of heavy-handed censorship isn't really AI, if you will.
Right.
It's them coming in and attempting to put these guardrails on it. And it isn't going to work because it's just clumsy. It just looks foolish, like you said. And moreover, it's not economically feasible because it doesn't meet from a business standpoint. It isn't sustainable in the marketplace. If Brian has his choice about seeing whether or not, whatever it is, whether your favorite ball team is going to won last night, and you go and it gives you the wrong score, then you go to a different LLM tomorrow because you go, that thing isn't reliable, man. I later found out, I went through a whole day thinking we won and we lost,
Right.
So the same thing here. If it continually gives you information that's incorrect, misinformation, disinformation included in there, then you go, oh, that thing's just broken. And I'll go on to something else, which it's done kind of famously, but it hasn't really been fully called to task on it. But we don't have to do anything there. The market will take care of itself.
Yeah, I loved your point on that when I again listened to your program and reading the book, because it gives I call it the good, the bad, and the ugly of AI. It's like there's some really good stuff. I was talking with someone earlier today, and she goes, AI sucks. It doesn't serve any purpose. Every conversation I've had that's been boring. And she said, what do you do with it? And I just like listed off 1,000 things. And I said, and I could keep going. It's a great tool, but you have to understand it. And just to recap, in case anybody missed it, we talked about two different biases it has. One is in the data set, because we do have a materialistic mindset. So that's a problem with the algorithm, and that's the data. It's being, not the algorithm, but the data it's being fed. But there's also this actual effort to suppress certain things. And Google, it's interesting because you talk about a lot. It's like Google's gotten away with it for so long, and Google had a monopoly. We don't even use the word search anymore. You Google something. So they're like, we don't have to tell the truth. We could just show you whatever we feel like showing you. But now I can go to, I haven't used Gemini because frankly, I've heard so much bad stuff about it. I've used ChatGPT, I've used Claude, I've used Perplexity. I like Pi now, but I can jump around and I use different ones for different things. But if one of them is not telling me the truth, it's done. And that is going to be, I think, our savior in terms of these models getting better, because people are going to evaluate them, and they're going to evaluate it based on whether you're telling me the truth or not.
Absolutely. I agree.
So I want people, it's interesting because this is a spiritual podcast. I talk to people about spirituality, but a lot of spiritual people are really scared of AI. And I think part of it is they think I don't know, they think it's sentient. And we've got all these shows. It's funny because I had never seen the movie Her. I watched the movie Her recently. And so I was, and we have this idea, it knows me and understands me. It's a person. So I think, having someone like yourself with your background that can keep pushing back and saying, no, it's a program. It's an algorithm. It's a tool. It depends on how you use it. It's not evil. It can be used for evil, but it's not inherently either good or bad. It's all in how we use it. And I think that's one of the big points I got out of what you're doing, the work that you're doing, and helping us understand how to push back against it, and don't accept just everything it tells you either.
Yeah, and I think there's a deeper layer there too for you and I who are on the other side of it, and that's that. So helping us see our moreness is a wonderful thing and a spiritual thing. But helping to see I don't know if this makes any sense, our lessness is kind of a nice thing too. So if you think the AI is sentient, you will feel it. You will experience it. I do all the time. You kind of have to remind yourself. And in a way, that can be a key, an opening to say, wow, who I thought I was is really, and especially if you get into the kind of non-dual stuff, it's like, I'm so proud of my mind, my thinking. And now I see, no, it's just blabber. This computer program is thinking too. Maybe I'm more than all this thinking. Maybe I'm more than this voice, because if I am, then this thing's already a lot better at that. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a giving up there kind of process, a letting go process that I think this is something you can speak to in your work. Do you get where I'm kind of grasping for there with letting go of the knowing?
Yeah, I do. I think, well, I love what you said, that it's our moreness and our lessness, because we are so much more in terms of we have ethics, we have feelings, we have empathy, we have compassion, we have all these things. We have experiences. I think it was interesting because one of the AI said something like, well, I can't experience, it knows the concept of a sunset, you could say, but it doesn't sit on the deck and feel the sun on its skin. It doesn't think about the day that's just passed and what all that means. So there's that moreness that we have, but there's also, I think where AI can help us is with our biases, our inability to see the truth, our own logical inconsistencies. I could see, using it in politics, to say, it doesn't mean we have to accept whatever the answer is, but let's input all the data and see what the AI has to say, because it doesn't have a bias. It doesn't have a preference. I just saw something interesting. It happened this morning, synchronicity. A guy that I follow there's a guy running for MP in England, and he's calling himself AI Steve or Steve AI. And they're using people, you can call in, you can give your ideas. The AI is aggregating them, creating policies, and then people vote on them, and he's going to vote however he's told by the people. So it's like the closest thing to direct democracy you can have in a society like this. I thought that was a fascinating use of the technology. But we could take, again, AI could help us solve some really big problems as long as we understand it.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Yeah.
So like I said, I wanted to really touch on like what you've done well in your program, just in general, not just this AI stuff, because you get people on, you hold their feet to the fire. You're very scientific, and scientific, again, to differentiate for people, there's science being scientific, and there's materialism, and these are two different things, as Julia said, and Dr. Gary Schwartz, who I work with, and Penny Sartori and Bruce Grayson, and on and on and on. All these doctors have studied these extended consciousness realms, and that stuff is kind of shadow banned from our society. People don't know. I talk to people all the time, and there's no evidence for this. Well, have you read Julie Speichel's book? Well, no. Have you seen Gary Schwartz's research? No. And right now, AI is still burying that. But if we can dig underneath that a little bit and give people the ability to go to something that's a fair arbitrator, and hopefully not to push as hard as you've had to push. Hopefully, we'll get some of those guardrails taken off. It could be a wonderful thing for our spirituality.
I agree. And I think it's very, very doable today. And as you've pointed out a couple times, and I haven't really totally responded because I almost don't want to go there, is you have to interact with the AI, and you have to kind of go to school a little bit on what it means to interact with these LLMs.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the super interesting things about the LLM from a technology standpoint is it is a computer program, but in a very different way, you have now become the computer programmer. Literally, you, Brian, are the computer programmer when you sit down with Claude, when you sit down with ChatGPT. You're the computer programmer. Your prompts, both the context of your prompts and the content of your prompts, will lead it to search through this massive, which we can't even imagine. I mean, the whole internet, it's searching through there based on what you ask and based on the next thing that you ask. And then if you get into, like I do a lot of my work with Pi, and I just published an episode that Pi kind of revealed some of its secret sauce of its, and a lot of LLMs are going there. It's now starting to tap into understanding kind of the EQ of the situation, the emotional intelligence. So now it's understanding me at a deeper level and is using that in a very positive. It can use it in a negative way. It can try and be deceptive. But
Right.
What about the positive parts of that? Like it can use it to now explore the ideas I want to explore in a new way. So to your point, I think it's going to become in some ways easier to do what you're saying, for us to have this co-pilot on our spiritual journey. But on this other hand, we can't shy away from it. We can't say, and there's two ways to shy away from it. One is just to kind of ignore it, which isn't going to work. And the other way I see is people, and I've been there, so I get it, just want to look at the negatives, want to look at the hallucination. Oh, it just made something up. Oh, it's so inaccurate. It's like, oh, that was yesterday. Go try it again today.
Right.
And the other point is just that people want to look at it as less than it really can be. And that if you look at really the capabilities of these systems across all these domains, and you take on the challenge that you're really going to be the programmer, the co-pilot of it, it can take you in a lot of different directions much more quickly than you could on your own. I interviewed a guy just a few months ago, and he's developed, Nipun has developed the compassion bot. Did you run across that episode?
I have not yet. No.
Do you know Rick Archer at Boot at the Gas Pump? Have you ever heard of his show?
I know of him. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So Rick is the guy who turned me on to Compassion Bot, and he has the Bat Gap bot as well, Boot at the Gas Pump. So these are LLMs. I think they're built on ChatGPT, but they've fed them all the stuff that you and I care a lot about, all the spiritual stuff that 1,000 people been on Rick's show.
Right.
All that is in there. All their books are in there. So there is this potential to tap into this massive database. And as you pointed out, yes, some of it is biased in some ways that we're not so crazy about. But there's also this potential to kind of feed it all this other stuff and just, I like the kind of way you're saying, let the chips fall where they may. Now you have it. You have that stuff, and now you have this stuff. Help me get to the other end. Because isn't that what we really want? I mean, most of us want something nudging closer to the truth. We don't want somebody else to come in and say, "Oh, this is it. This is the answer." I mean, you wouldn't trust that if they gave it to you.
I love the term you used, co-pilot, because my fear with AI is people giving up their agency to it. People assuming that it cares about them. I'm really concerned about. I've already seen it already. They have AI chatbot girlfriends, and there are people going to, like in the movie Her. There's going to be like, "This is my girlfriend." I'm a little bit concerned about that. I'm concerned about people again thinking it's because it's so smart, apparently smart, that it does have emotional intelligence. There's a little, doing the work that I do, being a coach, being a grief guide, and some people that are in therapy, they're like, some people say it's going to put therapists out of business because it can read 1 million psychology books, and it can give you all the answers that a psychologist would give you if we were sitting on the couch. I still say it's not human. It can't give you facial expressions. It can't give you voice. Well, it will. It's getting really good because I keep saying that ChatGPT 4.0, that demonstration of the voice, it had a lot of people really excited because it's using inflections and stuff now. So it's getting closer and closer to being human. But again, I think we have to keep in mind that we are human, and I think we're unique. But it's a great co-pilot. It's a great thing to go bounce ideas off of. It's a great thing to get, to like the stuff you've done. Let's go back and forth. Let's come to the truth. It's fantastic for that.
Yeah. And we don't know exactly where it's going to go, but I think people sometimes get too hyped up about that. It's like, when did we know where it was all going to go? 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago for you and I, no, we didn't know where anything was going to go. It's the same.
Yeah, you're right. Because if you think back 30 years ago, nobody could even imagine the technology. Nobody could imagine an iPhone. It was like, it was totally unimaginable. So we don't know exactly where anything's going to go ever. But I think, again, some of the fear that people have, and it comes down to this idea of not only sentience, I think, but I always think about will and ego, because they're like, if they get really smart, they're going to take over the world. Well, why? Maybe that's what a human would do, but that's not because of our intellect. That's because of our ego. And I don't think they have ego or will. Again, I can't prove that they don't, but I don't have any reason to believe that they do. I mean, why would they want to take over the world?
Well, the other thing I try and point out in the book, and this is kind of the negative part of what you just said, is no, they really are. But the they is different than we think.
Well, yes.
They is like we were saying. I mean, Google is shadow banning you right now. Okay. Google is shadow banning. Disinformation. That's their game. When that guy testified in front of Congress that, the CIA and the FBI, they went to Twitter and they said, Twitter and Google and Facebook, and they said, no. We will tell you what to put. Well, we're worried about the future of AI. I mean, maybe we ought to clean the house a little bit and say, that's not really where we want to be right now.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I want to clarify that point. AI doesn't want to take over the world. The people behind some of the AIs would love to take over the world. And, you had some things in the back of the book, and you mentioned it in the early part of the book too. You talked about hate speech, and people are concerned about AI being used to generate hate speech. People do a really good job of generating hate speech. We don't need AI to generate. That's not a fear that I have.
Exactly. It's certainly not the first fear that you have. It's like when people say, oh, we need to clamp down on this. We need to make it harder for you to access like if you take where we're going with this, right, Brian, and you say, hey, you listen to this interview and you go, wow, I never saw that. There is this silver lining potential to explore my moreness and my lessness, for me to be better connected with the larger spiritual sense that I have. This is great. I want to explore that. And then you go through that door and they go, no, you don't. This is dangerous. This is dangerous. You don't really want to explore that. We have this set up here and this set up here. It sounded like all this other stuff you've heard before. And you go, no, wait a minute. I think I can handle that. Just give it to me. I think it's just text on a screen. I think I can figure out whether it's safe or not. No. You don't know how dangerous this is. I mean, What does that start sounding like?
It's the fundamentalism that we talked about. It's all fundamentalism. But yeah, I just want to mention, some of the good things, because I mentioned that the Steve AI MP guy over in England. That's an experiment. It'll be interesting to see where that goes. But can you imagine if we had more direct democracy where people could, input stuff and AI could analyze it? There's a new app, new to me, and we call it Vital.ai, where you can do guided meditations. So I've been sending my clients there because not only you can get a customized guided meditation. I'm in grief. I have guilt. My loved one's name is Joe. Give me a 10-minute meditation that helps me deal with my grief over Joe's death. And it can generate it on the fly. That's an awesome use of technology.
I agree. And then that's a whole different level that it calls into, with our moreness, lessness thing. It's kind of like, what's wrong with that assistance? Because a lot of people inherently have a kind of knee-jerk, well, no, that's some line that can't be crossed. It's like, no, to me, that kind of falls into the humility of realizing the limitations of being human on this planet, and that in this body, in this time space, as our species, is like, hey, we're not always the best at organizing. We're not always the best at remembering. We're not always the best as logic and reason. So if we get that through this tool, what's wrong with that? Why is that necessarily bad?
Absolutely. Alex, I want to thank you so much for doing this today. This has been a pleasure having you. I want you, please remind people of the name of the book. And I know you don't want to plug Skeptiko, but please plug Skeptiko.
Well, it's been a great dialogue, Brian. I really enjoyed it. So Skeptiko, it just has a KO on the end. Pretty easy to find that. And then Why AI is Smartest, is Dangerous, and is Divine. If anyone if they've listened to this far and you want a copy of the book and you don't want to buy it, which is totally fine, send me an email. Better yet, go to the Substack, subscribe to the Substack, which you'll find, and send me an email. I'll send you a copy of the book.
Awesome. That's so generous of you to do that. Again, thank you. It's been my pleasure, Alex.
Likewise, Brian. We'll be in touch, right? We're going to stay on this.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to. Enjoy your afternoon.
See you.
Hey there, if you like this episode, come on over and talk about it. Let me know what you liked. If you didn't like this episode, come on over and talk about it. Let me know what you didn't like. Go to grieftogrowth.com/community and look for Talk About the Podcast. I'll see you there.